Deep in the middle of the ocean, there was once a sea kingdom. The most wonderful trees and plants grew there, and all the fish, big and small, slipped between their branches. At the very deepest spot lay the Sea King's palace. Its walls were made of coral, and its roof was built out of mussel shells, each holding a white, gleaming pearl. That's where the Sea King once lived with his 6 small daughters. All of his daughters were lovely, but the youngest one was the most beautiful of them all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose petal, her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. But, like the rest of them, she had no feet. Her body ended in a fish's tail. Outside the palace there was a large garden with bright red and dark blue trees, with fruit that shone like gold and flowers that blazed like fire. Each of the small princesses had her own little plot in the garden where she could plant what she wanted. One grew her flower plot in the shape of a whale. Another made hers look like a little mermaid. But the youngest princess was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful. All she wanted in her garden was a beautiful marble statue of a young man which she had found on the seabed after it had been lost in a shipwreck. Nothing made her happier than to hear about the human world above them. "When you reach your 15th birthday," her grandmother told her, "you will be allowed to rise up out of the sea, sit in the moonlight on the rocks, and watch the big ships that sail past. You will see forests and cities." But, being the youngest of her sisters, the little mermaid had 5 long years to wait before she could venture up to the surface of the water. At last she reached the age of 15. She bid goodbye to her sisters and rose up through the water, as light and clear as a bubble. The sun had just set as she lifted her head above the surface, but all the clouds were still gleaming like roses and gold, and the sea was absolutely still. On it was a large ship filled with the sound of music and singing. The little mermaid swam right up to the cabin window, and, looking through it, she saw the handsomest young prince with large black eyes. He couldn't have been much older than 16. It was his birthday, which was why everyone was celebrating. The sailors were dancing on deck, and when the young prince came out, more than 100 rockets shot up into the air. The little mermaid was unable to take her eyes off the ship and the handsome prince. But deep down in the sea there was a humming and droning, and she suddenly realized in horror that there was going to be a terrible storm. As the rain pelted down and the waves became stronger, the ship creaked and groaned, then rolled over onto its side. The little mermaid looked for the young prince, and when the ship came apart, she saw him sink down into the depths of the ocean. begin with, she was quite pleased, for now she thought he would be coming down to her. But then she remembered that humans cannot live in the water. So she dived deep beneath the surface and managed to reach the young prince, whose arms and legs were beginning to go limp. He would have died if the little mermaid had not come to his rescue. She held his head above water, and when the storm finally came to an end, she carried him to the shore. Laying him down on the sand, the mermaid kissed his lovely high forehead and stroked back his wet hair. To her he looked like the marble statue down in her little garden. She kissed him again and wished for him to be allowed to live. Then the little mermaid hid behind some rocks and watched to see who came out to the poor prince. It did not take long before a young girl appeared. Spotting the prince, she quickly fetched some other people, and the mermaid saw the prince recover and smile at everyone around him. But he didn't smile at the mermaid, because he did not even know that she had saved him. She felt so sad, and when he was taken back to his palace, she dived sorrowfully down into the water and swam back home to her father's palace. When her sisters asked her what she had seen up above, she did not tell them anything. Instead, she became even more quiet and thoughtful than normal. By day, she sat silently in her little garden, hugging the beautiful marble statue that looked like the prince. At night time, she would sometimes swim up to the surface of the ocean and sit on the rocks where she had last seen the prince, singing a sad song of longing to the moon. Finally, she couldn't bear it any longer, and she asked her old grandmother, "When humans do not drown, can they stay alive forever? Don't they die like we do down here in the sea?" "Oh, yes," the old woman said. "They do have to die, and their lives are even shorter than ours are. We can live until we are 300 years old." "Well," said the little mermaid, "I would give up all those 300 years just to be a human being for one day." "You mustn't spend your time thinking of such things," the old woman said. "Only if a human were to fall so in love with you that you were more to him than his father and mother. Only then could you become a human. But that can never happen, for what is so lovely here in the ocean, your fish's tail, they find ugly up there on the earth. They don't understand it at all. There one has to have two clumsy props that they call legs to be considered beautiful. Let's be content, the old woman said. But soon the little mermaid began to think once again of the world above her. She couldn't forget the handsome prince. So, one day, she slipped away from her father's palace. I will go to the sea witch, she thought. I've always been so afraid of her, but she can help me. The sea witch's house was in the middle of a strange forest. All the trees and shrubs were half animal and half plant. They looked like snakes with hundreds of heads growing out of the earth. Everything in the sea they could catch hold of, they twined round tightly and never let go again. The little mermaid remained standing, quite terrified, outside there. Her heart pounded with fear, and she almost turned back. But then she thought of the prince, and that gave her courage. She bound her long, fluttering hair around her head so that the sea creatures couldn't grab hold of it. Then she folded both her hands over her breast and swam among the horrible creatures, which stretched out, trying to grab hold of her. She arrived at a large, slimy place in the forest, where large, fat water snakes tumbled and showed their vile, white-yellow bellies. In the middle of this clearing, she spotted a house that had been built of the white bones of shipwrecked human beings. There sat the sea witch, holding a toad that was eating from her mouth. I know what you want, the sea witch said. It's very stupid of you, but you shall have your wish, even so. You want to get rid of your fish's tail and have two legs instead to go around on, just like human beings, so that the young prince can fall in love with you. And just then the witch cackled so loudly and horribly that the toad fell to the ground. I will prepare a drink for you, said the witch. Tomorrow, before the sun rises, you must swim with it to the land, sit down on the shore and drink it. Then your tail will split and turn into what humans call a nice pair of legs. But it will hurt you as though a sword was slashing through your tail. Everyone who sees you will say you are the loveliest human child they have ever seen, but each step you take will be like treading on a sharp knife. Are you prepared to suffer all this? If so, I will help you. Yes, the little mermaid said with a trembling voice. But remember this, the witch said. Once you have turned into a human, you can never become a mermaid again. You can never dive down through the water to your sisters and to your father's palace. And if you do not gain the love of the prince, your heart will break and you will become foam on the water. This is my wish, the little mermaid said, and was deathly pale. But you must also pay me, the witch said, and what I am asking for is no trifle. You have the loveliest voice of all those here on the seabed, and you think that you will be able to entrance the prince with it. But That voice you must give to me. I must have the best thing you own for my precious drink." "But if you take my voice," the little mermaid said, "what am I left with?" "Your beautiful appearance," the witch said, "your floating walk, and your shining eyes. With those you're sure to be able to captivate a human heart. Well, have you lost your courage? Stretch out your little tongue. I will cut it off as payment, and you shall have your powerful drink." "So be it," the little mermaid said, and the witch fetched her cauldron to boil the magic potion. Finally, the drink was ready. It looked like the clearest water. "There it is," the witch said, and cut the little mermaid's tongue off. She was mute now, unable to either sing or speak. She swam away as fast as she could, and, coming out of the forest, she saw her father's palace. It made her feel desperately sad, but she turned away from the palace and rose up through the dark blue waters. When she reached the surface, the little mermaid drank the fiery, sharp drink, and it was as though a two-edged sword had struck right through her. She fainted and collapsed on the shore. But when she woke up, there stood the handsome young prince with his jet-black eyes fixed on her. She looked down and saw that her fish's tail had been replaced by two small white legs. Then, quickly, to hide her nakedness, she wrapped herself in her long hair. The prince asked who she was and how she had come to be there, but because she could not speak, she only looked at him gently and sorrowfully with her dark blue eyes. He took her by the hand and led her into the palace. Every step she took was, as the witch had warned her earlier, as though she was treading on pointed needles and sharp knives. But she put up with this gladly, overjoyed just to be with the prince. At the palace, dressed in fine silk clothes, she looked beautiful. Admiring her grace and beauty, the prince said that she was to be with him always. Together they rode through the fragrant forests and climbed high mountains, and, although her feet bled, she merely laughed this off and continued to follow him. Day by day, the prince became more dear to her, and he was as fond of her as one would be of a good, sweet child. But it never occurred to him to make her his wife. "Aren't you fonder of me than all the rest?" the eyes of the little mermaid seemed to say when he took her in his arms and kissed her lovely forehead. "Yes, you are dearest of all to me," the prince said, "for you have the best heart of them all. You are the most devoted to me, and you resemble a young girl I once saw but will surely never find again. I was on a ship that was wrecked. The waves washed me ashore near a sacred temple where there were several young girls. The youngest of them found me down on the shore and saved my life. She was the only one I could ever love in this world. But you do look like her, and therefore it is good fortune that you have been sent to me. We shall never be parted." On hearing this, the little mermaid sighed sadly. "He doesn't know that I have saved his life," she thought. "Never mind. Even so, I am with him. I see him every day. I will take care of him, love him, sacrifice my life to him." But soon the news came. The prince was to be married to a princess. the lovely daughter of a king from another country. All the church bells rang out in celebration, and trumpets sounded from the high towers. There were balls and parties every night, and finally the princess herself arrived on the scene. The little mermaid had to admit that she had never seen a more beautiful creature. "It's you," the prince said to his bride, "you who saved me when I lay like a corpse on the shore," and he embraced his blushing bride. "Oh, I am far too fortunate," he said to the little mermaid. "The best thing I could ever have hoped for has happened. You will rejoice in my good fortune because you are more fond of me than all the others." So the little mermaid kissed his hand, even though her heart was breaking. On the morning of the wedding, the church bells rang out. Fragrant oil burned in precious silver lamps. The priests swung incense, and the bride and bridegroom joined hands. The little mermaid stood in silk and gold and held the bride's train, but she thought only of all that she had lost in this world. That very same evening, the bride and bridegroom boarded another ship, the cannons were fired, and the ship glided across the clear water. The little mermaid knew this would be the last evening she would see the man for whom she had abandoned her home and her family, given up her lovely voice, and suffered endless torment every day without him having any idea of this. The prince kissed his lovely bride, and she played with his black hair, and, arm in arm, they disappeared from view. The little mermaid stood on the shore and looked towards the approaching dawn. Then she saw her sisters rise up out of the sea. They were pale like she was, and their long, beautiful hair was gone. It had been cut off. "We have given it to the witch so that she can bring help and prevent you from dying tonight. She has made a deal with us. Before the sun rises, you must kill the prince, and then you will become a mermaid once again and be able to come down into the water to us and live for 300 years after all. Hurry!" "I could never do that," the little mermaid cried. "You can never go back," said the witch's voice inside her head. "Come to us," whispered the ocean spray, "forever." With tears streaming down her cheeks, the little mermaid gazed out across the ocean one last time. Then she threw herself into the water and disappeared into the welcoming waves.